If you were sitting alone in a quiet room right now, no phone, no music, nothing to do, how long before you reached for something? Be honest. Not honest in the way you'd answer if someone were watching. Honest in the way you know yourself at 11 at night, when the house is finally quiet, and the first thing you do is turn something on. For most people living in the modern West, the answer is somewhere between 30 seconds and 2 minutes. Some people can't even get to 30 seconds. The hand moves before the thought does. The podcast is already playing before you've decided you wanted it. And here's the thing nobody says out loud. That reflex doesn't feel like a choice. It feels like breathing. It feels like the natural state of a person in a room. Silence, by contrast, feels like something is wrong. I want to tell you that what you just recognized in yourself, that pull, that near automatic reach, was diagnosed with uncanny precision by a 17th century French mathematician who had never seen a smartphone, had never heard a podcast, and died at 39. His name was Blaise Pascal. And what he wrote about the quiet room is probably the most accurate description of your interior life that you will encounter this year. The problem is that most people who've heard his most famous observation have heard a version that strips out the part that actually explains you. So we're going to look at what he actually wrote. And then we're going to sit in that room together for 10 minutes. Not literally, but close enough that you'll feel it. Before Pascal gets introduced properly, something needs to be said in your defense. The reach for the phone, the television left on as background, the podcast that plays while you cook, and the music that plays while you drive, and the audiobook that plays while you fall asleep, none of that is a generational failure. It is not evidence that your attention span has been destroyed, or that you are weaker than people who lived before screens, or that something has gone wrong with you specifically. It is, in fact, one of the oldest human behaviors in recorded history. Pascal was writing in the 1650s. The distractions available to him were hunting, gambling, conversation, court spectacle, and warfare. Not better than yours in any meaningful sense, just differently packaged. And what he observed about the people around him and about himself was that they pursued these things not because they were pleasurable in themselves, but because the alternative, stillness, quiet, a room without a vent, produced something intolerable. He had a word for this pattern. In French, it is divertissement, usually translated as diversion or distraction, but the root meaning is closer to turning away, a turning away from something. And Pascal was very precise about what was being turned away from. We'll get there. But first, the room. Here is what Pascal actually wrote in the Pensées, in the fragment that has been quoted and misquoted so many times that the real version is almost unrecognizable. The original French reads, J'ai souvent dit que tout le malheur des hommes vient d'une seule chose, qui est de ne savoir pas demeurer en repos dans une chambre. A careful English rendering. I have often said that all the misfortune of men comes from one thing only, not knowing how to stay quietly in a room. Notice what that says and what it doesn't say. It does not say we are distracted. It does not say we have short attention spans. It does not say we are addicted to entertainment. What it says is that we do not know how to remain in repose, in rest, inside a room. And the consequence Pascal names for this incapacity is not inefficiency or scattered thinking. It is le malheur, misfortune, wretchedness, unhappiness, depending on the translator. The whole of it. That is a staggering claim. And it is not a throwaway line. Pascal spends several surrounding fragments building the architecture underneath it, because he knows the claim needs explaining. Why would the inability to sit quietly in a room produce the whole of human wretchedness? What is in the room that we cannot bear to encounter? This is where the popular version of the quote falls completely silent, and where Pascal is only getting started. The architecture Pascal builds is this. Human beings, he observed, are creatures in an impossible situation. We are finite. We will die, and we know we will die, which no other creature in our observation does. We are also, in his framing, large enough to recognize that finitude and feel its full weight. We sense that we were made for something beyond what we have. We carry a gap between what we are and what we dimly feel we should be that nothing in ordinary life manages to close. This condition, sitting with it in a quiet room, is unbearable, not uncomfortable. Unbearable. The silence does not simply allow the condition to surface, it removes the only thing that keeps the condition at bay. That thing is divertissement. Pascal's point is not that we enjoy our distractions. His point is that diversion is functional. It works. It keeps the awareness of the gap, the finitude, the weight of what we carry, at a level the conscious mind can manage. A person playing cards is not thinking about death. A person scrolling is not sitting with the question of whether their life has amounted to what they hoped. A person listening to a podcast while they drive is not alone with the voice that asks, at 3 in the morning, whether the faith they've practiced for 40 years has ever actually opened into the room they imagined was behind the door. Divertissement is not weakness. It is a rational response to an intolerable situation, rational in the way a painkiller is rational. The problem, Pascal says, is that it doesn't fix anything. It manages the symptom while the condition deepens. And the management becomes the condition, until a person can no longer tell the difference between the noise they chose and the life they're living. Extending Pascal's logic, and this is the narrator's own extension, not something he wrote. Every scroll, every podcast cued at bedtime, every television left on in an empty room is performing exactly the function his 17th century gamblers and hunters were performing. The technology is different. The flight is identical, which brings us back to the room and to what happens around minute 7. If you've ever actually tried to sit in silence, really tried, not for a moment before the next thing begins, but with the deliberate intention of staying there, you may know the sequence. The first 2 or 3 minutes are restlessness. The body wants to move. The hands look for something. There is a low hum of awareness that you are doing nothing. And the word nothing carries an accusation. You think about what you should be doing instead. You think about the email you didn't send. The restlessness is unpleasant but manageable. Then, somewhere around minute 5, something shifts. The restlessness becomes something else. It is harder to name. It is not boredom exactly, though it can look like boredom from the outside. It is more like pressure, a feeling that something is pressing in from the periphery of the quiet. Something that has been waiting just outside the noise, and now that the noise is gone, it is right there at the edge of your awareness. Not a thought, more like the shape a thought would have if it were allowed to fully form. Most people, and I mean the overwhelming majority of people who attempt this deliberately, give up somewhere in this range. The phone is checked, the music goes back on. The decision is made, usually without quite being a decision, that this is not working, that silence is not for them, that they've tried and it didn't help. Here is what Pascal would say about that moment. Not his words, but the clear extension of his diagnosis. That is not the wall. That is the door. The pressure that builds around minute 7 is divertissement withdrawing. What you feel pressing in from the edges is not anxiety, not a malfunction of your nervous system, not evidence that you need more practice or better technique. It is the condition Pascal spent years describing. The natural human experience of finitude, of the gap, of what sits at the bottom of a quiet room when the noise is finally gone. It is unbearable in the way Pascal said it was unbearable. That is accurate. He was not exaggerating and he was not speaking metaphorically, but it is also information. And it is the only honest information the interior sends, without a filter. Before we get to what that information actually is, and what Pascal found on the other side of it, I want to say something to the person who recognized themselves in the hollow feeling underneath the noise. Not just the phone habit, the specific emptiness that the noise has been covering, the faith that has gone through the motions for decades without ever quite opening into the room you thought was behind it. Pascal has a full diagnosis for that too. Not a quick answer. A 5-stage account of what he called spiritual aridity, what it is, why it develops, and what it asks of the person who is honest enough to sit with it. I've built a short course around that diagnosis. It's called The Wrecked Interior, and it's 5 lessons, each about 10 to 15 minutes, with reflection built into each stage. If what you've been hearing has named something you've been carrying for a long time, the link is in the description. Now, what Pascal found in the room. He did not find peace, at least not the way the word is usually used. He did not emerge from stillness with a sense of resolution or settled confidence. What he found, and what his late writings document with extraordinary honesty, was something closer to clarity about the condition itself. In 1654, Pascal had an experience he recorded on a piece of parchment and sewed into the lining of his coat. He wore it close to his body for the rest of his life. It was found only after his death. The text is known as the Memorial, and it begins not with serenity but with fire. Few is the first word, and then a sustained encounter with what he simply called the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, distinguished explicitly from the God of the philosophers. What produced that encounter was not technique. It was, in part, The sustained practice of refusing divertissement, of staying in the room long enough for what the room contained to become clear. The biographical detail matters for this reason. Pascal was not writing about silence as a concept. He was writing from inside it, from years of staying in the room when the pressure to leave was exactly what you felt at minute 7. And what he found there reorganized everything else, not as an answer to the condition, but as a different relationship to it. Here is where fragment 427 of the Pensées lands, and it lands hard. Pascal wrote, in Lillian Crump's rendering of the verified text, "The only thing that consoles us for our miseries is divertissement, and yet this is the greatest of our miseries." Read that slowly. The only thing that consoles us for our miseries, the podcast, the scroll, the noise, the busyness, the thing that makes the condition bearable, is divertissement. And divertissement is the greatest of those miseries, not because distraction is sinful, not because leisure is a failure, because the management of the condition is also the thing that prevents you from ever knowing what the condition actually is, and therefore what, if anything, addresses it. The noise is not comfort. By Pascal's diagnosis, the noise is the cage. And it is the cage you built yourself, from materials that genuinely felt like relief, because the alternative was the room. The inversion is this. The panic you feel at minute 7 is not evidence that silence is wrong for you, or that your interior is too damaged to withstand it, or that you have some deficiency that others don't share. The panic is confirmation that Pascal's diagnosis is accurate. You are having exactly the experience he predicted, produced by exactly the mechanism he described, which means you are also, right now, at the only threshold where anything he found on the other side of it becomes accessible. The discomfort is the door, not the wall. You've been treating it as the wall for years. That is not a failure. That is what divertissement does. It turns the door around until the knob is on the wrong side. I am not going to tell you that 10 minutes of silence will change your life. Pascal would not have said that either, and I won't say it for him. What I will say is this. The thing that makes the room terrifying is not an accident of your personality or an artifact of your generation or a symptom that better habits will fix. It is the oldest human confrontation, described with more precision by one thinker than by almost anyone else in the Western tradition. And what makes that confrontation worth entering, not once, but repeatedly, not as a technique but as a practice, is that it is the only place where what you're carrying can be examined by something other than the noise you use to manage it. Pascal did not promise the examination would be comfortable. He promised it would be honest. There is a smaller question underneath everything I've said, and I want to leave it with you rather than answer it. Not the question of whether silence is good for you, or whether you should try it, or what the research says about mindfulness in the nervous system. The question is this. What is it, specifically, that you've been making sure you don't hear? You probably already know. You've been working very hard not to. The room is quiet. It will wait.